Okay, topic that's way too big to talk about in an hour or 50 minutes. But there are two things that I want to do. I want to talk a little bit about the big issues, and then I just want to spend a little bit of time giving you a bunch of buzzwords that you need to know when we have our speaker on Wednesday who is going to take this to a new level. The big question that I want to ask is what changes when things are online? So there's what's available online. That's something that we're all starting getting used to. But this is a new mode of access, a new way of finding historical material, collections material, whatever it might be. And that changes how it's used, and it changes what it means, and it changes the politics. And that's stuff that I want to look at. There's nothing new about new modes of access changing the way that you think about things. When slides of artworks became available, it was enormously controversial. And a place like the Barnes Foundation banned the reproduction of its images in color because it missed the whole point of what they were all about. You could only have black and white images. They didn't really approve of certain kinds of copies. When you started to print things, it changed the way you thought about objects. Every new technology has raised this notion that it's more democratic, maybe, but also that it's less precious. And Walter Benjamin's article on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction is the one to think about there, where he talks about the loss of an aura when you go to a printed thing, when you go to a photograph rather than a painting, say, that kind of issue. Other issue that I think is worth keeping in mind is this definition with two words, availability and accessibility. So availability is, here's a whole bunch of stuff, do what you want with it. And accessibility is some sort of interaction, some sort of making it really much more available. So as we think about the sites that we'll look at today, think about which of them are simply making things available, some of which ones allow you to make meaning out of the material that they're presenting. And one chart that I'd just like to show, just because when you're thinking about setting up a website with your collections, is it unmediated, which is a big database full of stuff, there's a lot of pictures, or mediated, which is we're going to tell you how to look at it, we're going to tell you what stories that are interesting. Is it fixed, as in we're going to show you a movie that will present our interpretation of this material, or is it dynamic? You get to do that. And then what's not on this chart, because it's at least 5 years old, is that there's a third dimension. How social is it? How much can you interact with other people at the site? This sort of assumes that all the interaction is between you and the presenters, but in fact on new websites, you have interactions between different users as well. So imagine a third dimension of that I don't know how to draw. That would be would add that. So those are some backgrounds, some things to think about. I'm going to start with some archive sites first. And the big one, and the first one in some ways, is the American Memory site. American Memory site is full of wonderful things. It's also getting rather old. As far as I can tell, they haven't updated any of the about information on it for about 10 years or so. So it's sort of shocking how far back it seems to be. But there seems like 30 million things from the Library of Congress on the website. And not just Library of Congress, other places as well. The thing that's interesting about this site is that it's almost purely, here's a lot of information, not very clever search mechanisms, go off and look at it. You've all used this, right? Talked about this a little bit earlier. It's an amazing site if you're doing anything in American history, and then there's an equivalent one for the rest of the world at Library of Congress. It's sort of amazing. What it does do very well is break down the silos within the Library of Congress. So the searches are not by the photo department or the books or the manuscripts. It finds everything across all of those. Now, being the Library of Congress and a big government agency, there are also there's also databases and search sites on the Library of Congress site that are just photographs and manuscripts and Library of Congress and books that have more information. So there's some of that. What was fascinating about this when it was done is that it was a move away from the notion of somebody wants a picture, they write to the librarian, they get charged $25 and they get a picture. Or instead what they did is they went to a couple of big companies and raised, I think, $20 million up front and said, we're just going to make everything available for free. We will put large images, large files, very detailed images on the site. Don't bother us, just take it off the site. It turns out that libraries and museums lose money mostly on every image they sell. It takes more time to fulfill the order, and then they actually can, and costs more than they can actually afford to charge for it. And so it's a very, well, it's very tempting to say, look, we're making money by selling images of our pictures. In fact, this model, which is just no human intervention, just come and get the site, is actually a much better way of getting your material out there. There's not a lot of interpretation. There's a little bit of teacher guides. There is this, Canadian history cutting across things, but that's sort of your basic old-fashioned site.
Is there, are there any extra rules though if you're going to publish?
Mostly not. Mostly it says this is all in the public domain, book yourself. There are a few things that have some exceptions to them, but they're pretty good about saying if it's out here, it's yours, belongs to the American public. So, for instance, all of the images of the Office of War, that is FSA, the Farm Security Administration images. They were done for the public by the government. They're just there. Go and publish them. Don't even bother to tell us. This is rare stuff. Many organizations hold on to their copyrights very carefully. It's changing. National Gallery of Art has just made everything they have public. The museums, many of the British museums are starting to make everything, just make it available.
Is that international as well?
Yes, absolutely. But there's still a big fight going on. The challenge with this, of course, is that it is very much one way. They've got the material, you go and look at it. And so they tried an experiment a few years back, something called Flickr Commons, which is sort of still there. The idea was, well, maybe people know about some of these images that we've got. Let's put them up on Flickr and let people comment on them and see what they say. And it turns out that it was considered a successful experiment. So way more views on Flickr than on the Library of Congress website for any particular image. And even ones that were freely available on Library of Congress, more people started to download them if they were on Flickr. And most important, there were lots of comments, and almost all of them considered appropriate. It's worth looking at what they are. Some of them are wonderfully detailed. People said, oh, that's my great uncle, and here's where he lived, and here's the story. Most of them, I'd say 80% of them, not adding a lot of value. But again, trying to figure out a way to take this clearly closed site with lots of material and make it social in some way. So that's one of the big trends that people are trying to do. National Archives has a much bigger problem than the Library of Congress. They've got way more bits of paper, way harder to deal with. It's all manuscripts. And so what they've got, well, it says explore our nation's history through documents. What they've got online, of course, is mostly guides to the archives. Here, read this guide and then come here and ask somebody to look through the stuff. So for the genealogists, which is by far their biggest audience, they have this big warning. And I do my family history by typing in. And the answer, of course, is no. No place. It's impossible. It's not the way they're set up to do things. They've tried, I'll talk a little bit about crowdsourcing. The 1940 census just became available. Of course, it's all handwritten. And so they said, anybody who'd like, we'll set up a system that will allow you to transcribe this for other people to use. But mostly what they've done is outsource this whole issue of making the records available to a private firm. So does anybody here do genealogy? Okay, please talk. So do you use Ancestry.com? And?
It's an interesting model because you can use it at home for free, but you can't download anything, but all the public libraries can. So I do most of my research at home, figure out who people are I need to look up. So I live across the street from the public library. Go across the street, use theirs, download what I need to use. So that's just my way around paying for it, because it is a pay.
It's very expensive. It's $25 a month or something.
Right. So that's sort of, there are ways around it if you know how to work it. But then people can contact you. So I had someone who is my grandfather's, it would be the equivalent of my mother's generation, but from a sibling of my grandfather, like one of those cousins.
Right.
And they contacted me and were like, I saw this person in your family website and they're in mine. How are you related to me? So people can, it's like you can get more of your tree by knowing who else is in it.
It's quite remarkable what they've done. You can do your own research. And they've scanned and transcribed all those documents from National Archives and other places. But they've also let users supply records, and then you can interact on the site. So if your family trees intersect, and they've done the absolutely easiest possible searching way compared to National Archives. And then if you put your family tree up there, and if somebody else has the same great-grandfather, they can match it up. So again, take the material, make it not just that you can get at it, but that you can actually use it and add to it and interconnect to it, make it social. It's sort of a remarkable system. It's worth playing with. Often they have 3 months worth of subscription, and the ease of making this kind of data available and the sociability of it is sort of remarkable. Yeah.
My family uses one called genie.com that I think might be cheaper or maybe free. But I get updates once in a while that say like someone's birthday that I've never heard of was today.
Hugely popular, this kind of work in history. It's actually an interesting problem for historians. By far the largest market for all of these databases are the genealogists for all of history. And historians in general really don't like to, it just seems like not real history. It is where popular history making is done. Anyway, worth a look. And again, social, much more than almost all the materials is national material. It's all material that's out there in the public domain, and you could conceivably go to the Library of Congress or the National Archives in Washington and dig through the reels of microfilm and find it, but they've scanned it and made it available. So it changes what happens when you have this. So these materials were mostly captured as a way of keeping track of people, keeping sure that only the right people were let in at the border and that kind of thing. This is the Virginia Historical Society unknown no longer site of slave records. So the notion is, what if you took all these records that were used basically to keep track of slaves as property and said, these all have names. These people have names. You can actually go back and cut across the system and start to make a story about an individual rather than saying these are stories of property records. You start to change the way you think about it. It's an interesting site. The one that's done the most of this and sort of fascinating is a fellow named Tim Sherratt in Australia. So what he's done, Australia had a policy called White Australia, which was basically a way of keeping track of mostly Chinese, other Asians that were very closely controlled in Asia, in Australia. And so what he's done is gone through all of those records with a program that just looked at faces and captured all the faces, just like Facebook will go through and look at all of the faces on all the images. And he just captured all these images and makes a scrolling website of them. And it's really quite remarkable. Suddenly, it's all these people looking out at you from their official passport documents or whatever, and becomes not about being official records, but rather being a group of people. So again, you start to open up these databases and these official government systems, and you get a much different feel for how, you know, what's out there in the archives. There's lots of clever ways to do that. Any thoughts on that? Examples, other good examples of opening things up like that? It's worth thinking about when you look at an archive. How open is it? How much does it encourage you to think about it in a new and different way? To what extent does the policy of the people who created the archive shape the way it's used today? Another sort of archive, my favorite place, is the Internet Archive. So this is a nonprofit digital library founded by a fellow named Brewster Kahle, who said, I've just sold my internet company. I'm going to set up something that will capture everything on the internet and save it forever. I was at a conference when he announced this. I said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I was wrong, and he was right. So some of it is their own collection. So they are out there scanning books. Brown University contracted with them to scan Brown's books. Some of it is Google Books. So people have uploaded all of the books Google scanned onto this site so that Google doesn't keep control of them.
Is it called Internet Archive?
Internet Archive, archive.org. And the Prelinger Archive is a wonderful historical source. Rick Prelinger is a guy who devoted his life, he's not that old, but devoted 20 years of his life to collecting every public domain movie he could find. Thousands, mostly sort of training films, films for use in education, and he gave them all to the Internet Archive and put them all online. So Grateful Dead concerts, you know, they're public domain sort of, they're all on there. Anybody wants to upload their own concert recordings, you can see. So you should take a look at the